I woke up in a hospital bed, my head pounding, the room so white it hurt. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. The only proof I was still alive were the dull aches from the IV marks on my arms. Outside my door I heard my children laughing, casual, almost relieved. Their voices floated through the hallway, talking to the nurse. "She won't remember much," my daughter said. "She gets confused. Just tell her to rest." "She's better off not worrying," my son added. "We'll handle everything at home." Lying there, I realized I was utterly alone. Not a single familiar hand reached for mine. I listened, pretending to be lost in a fog, while my mind worked sharper than ever. I remembered birthdays, school recitals, late-night fevers, the life I'd built for them, piece by piece. But what I remembered most, in that moment, was betrayal. My children were telling everyone I'd lost my memory, that I was too fragile to know what was happening. But inside, every detail was clear as crystal. I could feel the sting of their plan, like ice water in my veins. If they thought I was too weak to fight back, they were about to be very surprised. Ever been underestimated by your own family? I have. And that day, everything changed. It's strange how a family can look solid from the outside, like a house built to withstand any storm, until you look close and see the cracks forming, hairline at first, then growing with every disappointment. For most of my life, I was the glue that held everything together. My husband, Paul, and I both worked at the same bank in town. We put in long hours, but we always made time for dinner as a family, for birthday cakes, graduations, and summer road trips. Our house was small but filled with laughter and late-night talks. I thought those memories would last forever. But when Paul died suddenly, it was like someone had blown out all the lights. I did my best to hold on, to keep the routines going for our kids, Leslie and Mark. But little by little things shifted. Leslie grew distant, her ambition sharp as glass. Mark started calling less, unless he needed advice, or more often money. The warmth faded, replaced by polite phone calls and quick visits. Somehow, our family dinners turned into transactions, our conversations into negotiations. I tried not to take it to heart, but sometimes I wondered if the love that built our home was just another thing that could be traded away. The day I landed in the hospital, I didn't know my absence would be so convenient for my children. It started with paperwork. I overheard Leslie in the hallway, her voice smooth and practiced as she talked to a social worker. "Our mom gets confused. She has good days and bad. We think she needs full-time care. And, well, she's no longer able to manage her own affairs." Before I knew it, I'd been labeled as incapacitated in every file that mattered. The signatures stacked up, doctor's notes, legal forms, each one putting distance between me and everything Paul and I had built. Even our old friends and neighbors believed the story. After all, my own children were saying it. I learned quickly to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open. When Leslie visited, she always asked the same questions. Did I remember what day it was? Could I recognize her? She looked at me the way a stranger looks at a problem to be solved. Mark, on the other hand, tried to avoid my gaze, keeping calls short and never meeting my eyes when he stopped by. They moved around me like I was a piece of furniture they couldn't quite throw out, but needed out of the way. The only person who seemed to doubt their story was my old friend Julia, the bank's longtime legal counsel. She stopped by one afternoon, carrying a bag of cookies and a gentle smile. She pulled up a chair and leaned in. "Some things you keep for rainy days, Ellie. Just because they don't see your strength doesn't mean it's gone." Before she left, Julia handed me an old book, one Paul used to keep on his bedside table. Inside, I found a folded piece of paper, carefully hidden between the pages. It was a list of account numbers and a handwritten note from years ago. "For Ellie, if you ever need to start again." That's when I realized, while my children were busy erasing my name from their future, Paul and I had left behind one last insurance policy they couldn't touch. The day the papers went through, I didn't even get a phone call. That's how easy it was for my children to erase me, from my own house, from their plans, from their lives. The home I'd poured 3 decades into, where every chipped tile and faded wallpaper had a memory attached, was suddenly just property. I watched it all happen in silence, a ghost in my own story, while my name was quietly removed from every deed and mailbox. Leslie was efficient. She always was. She handled the closing with a real estate agent she'd known since high school. Spun the story about her ailing mother so convincingly, even the notary signed off with pity in her eyes. Mark, who never bothered with details, only showed up for the celebration, his signature just a flourish to close the deal. By the time I left the hospital for the so-called rehab center, my house was already listed, and within 2 weeks, it was sold. The money hit their accounts fast, more than enough for new beginnings. Leslie traded in her old sedan for a sparkling white SUV. The kind she used to joke was for soccer moms with something to prove. Mark, always restless, convinced his sister to invest with him in the dream he'd been chasing for years. A coffee shop downtown where people would actually respect us for once. They even posted about it on social media, smiling in front of their new venture, celebrating a future built on the ashes of my past. I watched from the sterile quiet of my new room, scrolling through photos on a borrowed iPad, feeling every like and heart emoji as another nail in the coffin of the life I'd loved. No one asked me where I wanted to go after the hospital. The decision was made for me. An assisted living community, they called it. But it was just another way to keep me out of sight, out of mind. The room was neat, the staff polite, and the calendar was filled with bingo nights and gentle yoga. It would have been easy to fade away there, to accept the story my children were telling about me. But Julia, bless her, never let me forget who I was. Julia visited me every Thursday, always in her sharp navy suit, bringing news from the outside world. She never once treated me like I was fragile. Instead, she'd ask me about market shifts, about old friends at the bank, about the weather, small talk, but with a glint in her eye that told me she knew I was still in here, fighting. Once, after checking that the hallway was empty, she slipped me a small box wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was the old porcelain key from my first safety deposit box, a relic I hadn't seen in years. She pressed my hand, her voice low. "Just because they think you've lost everything doesn't mean you have. Some keys still open the doors that matter." Every evening as I looked out the window at the changing leaves, I turned the key over in my hand and remembered the real assets, the ones that couldn't be bought or sold with a forged signature. Meanwhile, Leslie and Mark poured themselves into their new business. They worked late, posting updates about their family café, spinning a story of siblings chasing the American dream. The irony was almost poetic. They named the place the Elm and Hearth, after the old tree in our front yard. Another piece of me, used without a thought. What they didn't realize was that they'd set up shop on land that had more secrets than they could ever imagine. A month after their grand opening, a notice was pinned to the back door. New ownership, lease renewal required. The agent they met wore a pleasant, professional smile, never giving away the name of the new landlord. Leslie shrugged it off. Mark grumbled about greedy investors. Neither guessed that the hands controlling the future of their fresh start were the same ones they'd tried so hard to leave behind. I kept my secret. I played the role they'd written for me, old, forgetful, out of touch. But every Thursday, Julia would nod and slide a folder across the table, full of updates and bank statements. We'd share a quiet laugh, remembering when people still believed in loyalty. What my children didn't understand was this. You can sell a house, but you can't erase a legacy. Some debts come due when you least expect them, and some keys, no matter how old, still fit the lock. That's the thing about betrayal. It always circles back. Long before my children decided my memory was fading, I'd learned a lesson that every banker knows by heart. Never put all your trust, or all your money, in one place. Paul, my late husband, used to say, "You can survive anything if you plan for the things you hope never happen." We had a routine, once a month. After dinner, we'd sit at the kitchen table with coffee and review our accounts. But after Paul's heart gave out, I started making decisions on my own. Quietly, methodically, I built a safety net, just in case. I never told Leslie or Mark about the investments. I knew how ambition can twist love, how desperation can turn family into strangers. Instead, I kept my own counsel, trusted my instincts, and worked closely with Julia. She wasn't just our family's legal advisor. She was a friend, someone who knew the fine print and the pitfalls. We started small, a little stake in a local real estate fund, a few stocks, a shell company here and there. Nothing flashy, just stable, boring assets that nobody in the family would ever think to look for. Paul's friend Henry had once said, "A legacy isn't just what you leave behind. It's what you protect while you're here." I took that to heart. With Julia's help, I set up a company, Westwood Holdings LLC, tucked away behind layers of paperwork and proxy names. Its sole purpose was to buy and hold property, quietly, safely, out of sight. Over the years, as my children built their own lives, I built a different kind of insurance policy. So when Leslie and Mark sold the house and used the proceeds to chase their dreams, they had no idea what was really in play. They saw a quick profit and a clean break. But I saw an opportunity, a chance to buy back the very land my memories were built on. When their coffee shop began to struggle, when the bills piled up and the local economy dipped, they did what so many people do when times get tough. They looked for a quick fix. In their case, that meant selling the back lot of the property to a local developer. What they didn't know was that Julia, ever the professional, was bidding on my behalf. She attended the auction, cool and collected, representing an interested investor. The room was full of big talkers, contractors, young entrepreneurs, old family names with more ego than cash. But Julia wasn't there for the attention. She bid steady and patient, letting the others drive up the price, then slipping in at the right moment with the winning offer. When the gavel dropped, she quietly filed the deed away, never once mentioning my name. The new owner, on paper, was Westwood Holdings. But in the fine print, just above the signature, was a tiny, almost forgotten doodle. A small cat with a curled tail, the mark I used to draw on Leslie and Mark's lunch bags when they were little. It was a habit I never broke, even on the most official documents. I wondered if they'd ever notice. Julia brought me the news that evening, her eyes sparkling with satisfaction. "It's done, Ellie. The land is yours again. They don't have a clue." She handed me the deed, my old cat signature smiling up from the page. For a moment, I felt the years fall away. I was no longer the frail patient in room 204. I was the woman who had planned, who had protected, who had quietly taken back what was mine. The days that followed were a study in irony. Leslie and Mark, frustrated by their failing business, debated selling the rest of the property. The market was soft, the offers lower than they'd hoped. When a new letter arrived, an invitation to discuss a leaseback arrangement with the new landlord, they barely glanced at the name. All they saw was another chance to keep their dream alive. I played my part to perfection, silent, invisible, lost in the haze they created for me. But inside, I savored every detail. Watching my children struggle with the consequences of their own choices was bittersweet. I would have given anything for them to see me, not as a burden, but as the mother who built their world. Instead, they saw only obstacles and opportunities. What if your worst enemy was the one you never saw coming? That was the question echoing in my mind as I turned the deed over in my hands. The little cat smiling up at me. In the end, sometimes the strongest revenge isn't loud or cruel. It's quiet. It's legal. And it's knowing that the game isn't over until you say it is. Failure comes quietly at first. Just a few slow days at the register. A bill you didn't expect. Leslie and Mark's café started strong. Their posts online painted a picture of the next big thing. Family and friends crowding the opening weekend, smiling for the camera. But small towns have long memories, and word spread fast about how the café came to be. Some neighbors whispered, others simply stopped coming. The cozy place they'd built on my old land started to feel colder every month. Within 6 months, profits shrank. The new espresso machine broke. Mark borrowed from a friend. Leslie tapped into her savings. Still, bills stacked up, rent, vendors, taxes, until the numbers stopped adding up at all. They tried everything: late-night specials, trivia nights, coupons, loyalty cards. Each week felt like another grasp at something that kept slipping away. The landlord, Julia Investments, sent courteous but firm reminders. Leslie grumbled to Mark about how these new owners don't care about us, while Mark said at least it wasn't a corporate chain. They never once suspected that everything, every lease, every email, passed first through Julia's careful hands. Sometimes she'd tell me over tea, "They're stubborn, Ellie, but the game isn't over yet." Eventually, Leslie and Mark made a desperate decision. They approached Julia's office to request a reduction in rent, hoping for leniency. Julia listened with the same patient expression she'd shown clients for years, her reply as professional as always. "Our client prefers to invest in families that build roots, not just profits." The message, gentle as it sounded, meant no mercy. The rent stayed high. With nowhere else to turn, the siblings closed their first location and moved across town. Ironically, into another vacant property managed by Julia's company. What choice did they have? The new spot was less impressive, but it was all they could afford. The day they moved in, Mark noticed a small handwritten note taped to the inside of the window. Home is not where you were born, but where you are remembered. Leslie laughed it off. Guess the last tenant was sentimental. But Mark paused. The words felt familiar, though he couldn't place them. The grand reopening was a quiet affair. I went, of course. I kept to the corner, blending in with a handful of gray-haired regulars. A simple dress, no makeup. My silver hair pulled back. For a moment, I watched Leslie organize the pastry case the same way I used to arrange after-school snacks. I saw Mark wipe down tables with the same determination he once used to build pillow forts in our living room. They looked older than I remembered, tired, worn, maybe finally understanding the weight of keeping a business alive. They didn't notice me at first, but as I left, Mark glanced my way. Our eyes met for just a heartbeat. I gave a soft, knowing smile, the kind only a mother gives. He hesitated, then turned away, shaking off a ghost. That moment, brief as it was, stayed with me for days. A week later, a thick envelope arrived at their shop, official, stamped, heavy with news. Inside, they found a new lease agreement. The rent had been increased. On the final page, tucked next to the lawyer's neat signature, was a doodle, small but impossible to mistake. A curled-tail cat, just like the ones I'd drawn on their lunch bags every first day of school. Leslie stared at it for a long time, biting her lip. Mark asked if she recognized the mark, but she only shook her head, her voice suddenly small. I don't know, Mark. Maybe it's nothing. Maybe it's just some office joke. But as she spoke, I knew part of her remembered. Not the businesswoman, not the daughter running from her past, but the little girl who'd clung to my hand on her first day at kindergarten, who'd begged me to draw that silly cat on every note, every sandwich wrapper, every birthday card. Outside, the town moved on. Cafes opened, cafes closed. Dreams rose and fell. Inside, my children were finally learning a lesson that money, for all its power, could never buy. You can't run from the roots that made you. And some debts, even the oldest ones, always come due. That day, as the autumn wind rattled the cafe windows, I walked past quietly, the porcelain key cool in my pocket, and smiled. The game wasn't over, but I had just made the next move. Failure has a sound. It's the hush of empty tables, the whisper of unpaid bills, the way siblings who used to laugh together now only argue in low, tired voices. After the new lease arrived with its cold reminder of a mother's mark, Mark and Leslie grew desperate. They called Julia's office nearly every day, demanding a meeting with the real landlord, hoping some face-to-face pleading could save their cafe. Finally, Julia agreed, but she made them wait. When Leslie and Mark entered the boardroom, it was sterile and cold. Julia seated at the far end of the table, her eyes unreadable. "We'd like to speak to the actual owner," Leslie began, her voice shaking despite her best efforts. "There's got to be something we can work out. We're not bad tenants. We just need a little help." Julia didn't smile. "Our client isn't interested in negotiating. All correspondence goes through me." Mark, frustrated, slammed his fist on the table. Don't you even care? This was our mother's place. Our family's. Julia's gaze sharpened. Was it? There was a long silence. Then, almost as an afterthought, Julia slid a small flash drive across the table. Before you leave, you might want to watch this, she said. You only lose what you choose to throw away. Later that night, in their cramped apartment, Mark plugged in the flash drive. The video began with shaky security footage from Julia's law office. Leslie and Mark, caught on camera after hours, searching through drawers and file cabinets, desperate for anything that would reveal the identity of the new owner. It was all there. Mark rifling through contracts, Leslie scanning emails, their voices caught on grainy audio. We have to find it, Les. There's got to be a loophole, a way back in. But there was nothing to find. Every file, every contract, every name led to the same dead end. Westwood Holdings. The final document, which Leslie found buried in the bottom drawer, bore the same hand-drawn cat doodle, impossible to mistake for anyone else. The reality hit like a cold slap. Leslie sank onto the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Mark punched the wall, anger burning where hope had lived just hours before. It's all gone, Les. We can't touch any of it. Leslie pressed her hands to her face. Why would she do this? Why would Mom go this far? Mark stared at the screen, voice hoarse. Maybe she was just tired of being the one they forgot. Maybe this was always her plan. The next morning, the siblings stood outside their closed café, the sky gray and threatening rain. The town moved around them, people glancing but never stopping. For years, Leslie and Mark had thought they could control the story, recast themselves as victims, survivors, even heroes. But the narrative had slipped away, rewritten by someone they had underestimated all their lives. Julia sent a final letter, short and to the point. All future correspondence should be addressed to legal. The owner is not available for personal meetings. In that moment, any last hope for redemption dissolved. There was no loophole, no secret inheritance, no miracle clause. They had gambled with love and memory, and lost everything that mattered. Inside my quiet apartment, Julia visited with pastries and updates. She told me about the siblings' last visit, how they looked smaller, diminished, like children lost in a world too big for them. I listened, the porcelain key heavy in my hand, and wondered if regret would finally teach them what ambition never had. Sometimes I thought about reaching out. But forgiveness, I realized, is not something you can force. It's not a contract or a clause. It's a choice, one that must be earned, not just asked for. As I watched the autumn rain blur the view outside my window, I wondered how many families live with scars like these, wounds that might fade, but never really disappear. Sometimes the only way to heal is to accept what's lost and build something better from the pieces. Have you ever learned a hard truth too late to say sorry? You're not alone. Some lessons come at a price, and some doors, once closed, are meant to stay that way. It's strange how hope lingers, even after the door has closed. For days, Leslie and Mark tried to call Julia's office, desperate for answers, apologies, anything that would bring them back to the life they'd lost. But emails went unanswered. Calls rang out. Finally, when all else failed, they did something they never thought they would. They tried to find their mother. It started with a search. Public records, old neighbors, rumors. They traced Ellie to a quiet assisted living home at the edge of town. A place with a garden full of roses, a library of battered books, and staff who remembered her as the lady who always smiles. One rainy afternoon, Leslie and Mark parked down the street, avoiding the front desk. Mark found a side door left open for deliveries. They slipped through silent halls, ducking cameras, nerves frayed. Mark's heart pounded. Leslie squeezed his hand, her resolve slipping between guilt and longing. A hallway security camera caught them peeking around a corner. On the video feed, they watched as Ellie sat in the sunroom, a porcelain teacup cradled between gentle hands. She looked serene, her silver hair neat, a novel open on her lap. Every so often she'd glance up, watching the rain spatter on the window, completely at peace. No sign of confusion, no hint of madness, just quiet dignity. Leslie felt her knees buckle. She looks happy. Mark could barely speak. She looks more alive than we do. Before they could step into the room, a firm hand touched Leslie's shoulder. Julia stood behind them, her lawyer's badge clipped to her coat, eyes clear as crystal. "I'm afraid Mrs. Westwood isn't accepting visitors," Julia said gently. "She doesn't want to see you, but she did leave you a message." She handed Leslie a sealed envelope, the now familiar cat doodle stamped in the wax. Leslie opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a single line, written in her mother's careful script. "Forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you live without." Mark looked away, blinking hard. Leslie pressed the letter to her chest, tears welling up. "We thought we could fix it. We thought—" Julia shook her head. "Sometimes the only thing left is to accept the story you wrote. Your mother's found her peace. I hope you find yours too." Outside, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Leslie and Mark walked back through the garden, passing other residents laughing with family, the sound of belonging drifting through open windows. For the first time, they realized just how far they'd wandered from home. On the other side of town, the old café stood transformed. A new sign gleamed above the door, gold lettering bright in the gray light. Westwood Family Trust, for those forgotten by their own. Inside, volunteers served coffee and soup, helping mothers and children with nowhere else to go. The air was warm with gratitude and the quiet hum of hope. Some people glanced at the siblings as they passed, but nobody whispered or judged. Here everyone was starting over. Mark paused, hand pressed to the glass, watching a little girl with wild curls giggle as a volunteer handed her a cup of cocoa. For a moment, he remembered childhood, before the mistakes, before the greed, before they lost sight of what mattered. Leslie read the plaque by the door. "In honor of Eleanor Ellie Westwood, who taught us that love is a gift, not a guarantee." They stood there, silent in the drizzle, understanding at last what their mother had reclaimed. It wasn't about property or money or pride. It was about dignity, kindness, and the power to start again, even if you have to do it without the ones you once called family. If you've ever wondered whether forgiveness is a right or a privilege, or if starting over can mean letting go, you're not alone. Sometimes the greatest closure comes not from words, but from actions that echo long after the door closes. Have you ever looked for forgiveness and found something deeper? If this story resonates, share your thoughts below. Sometimes peace is a journey only you can walk. The years turned gently, and with them, so did my sense of belonging. I never reclaimed an old title or sought public applause. Instead, I found my place in the quiet back row of a new beginning, a community center built from the ashes of what once was my family's café. The sign read, Westwood Family Trust, for those forgotten by their own. Inside, faces, some tired, some hopeful, gathered for a chance to start over. At the grand opening, I sat unnoticed among the crowd, hands folded over the porcelain key resting in my pocket. I watched mothers comfort their children, volunteers offer warm meals, laughter echoing across the polished floor. Every corner of that room hummed with new stories, of second chances, silent strength, and a different kind of family. Not one built on blood, but on choice. As the ceremony ended, a small girl brushed past my chair, her eyes bright. She bent to pick up something I'd dropped, the key. Handing it back, she asked, "Does it open something special?" I smiled softly. Maybe not a door, maybe a new chapter. Sometimes the best keys are the ones we give away. Looking around, I knew I didn't need to be recognized to feel whole. My scars were quiet now, etched into kindness, paid forward. Family isn't just who you're born to. It's who stands with you when everyone else walks away. If you ever had to rebuild your family from scratch, what would you do with your key? Share your story below. You never know who needs to hear it.